Did Yeshua disagree with what Moshe taught about divorce and remarriage? In Mr. R.L. Solberg's video about Jesus transposing the Torah, one of the first things that he brings up to show that the law of Moses was not God's ultimate goal for humanity is that Jesus taught something different than Moses did about divorce.
The law of Moses wasn't God's ultimate goal or his end plan for humanity. It was given for a time to guide his people, but we know that it's not God's ultimate standard because it includes compromises that were given because of our human weakness. For example, when the Pharisees tested Jesus on the issue of divorce, they challenged him on the law of Moses, which allows a man to give a certificate of divorce and send his wife away. And Jesus responded by telling them that because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. Divorce wasn't part of God's original plan for humanity. But the law of Moses contains a compromise that was given because of the hardness of the human heart.
Is divorce allowed under Jesus's quote-unquote new teaching ever? Most Christians believe today that divorce is allowed for at least adultery or marital infidelity. Some Christians that study a little bit deeper believe that divorce is allowed for physical desertion of an unbelieving or unrepentant spouse, based upon Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians 7. If you believe that divorce is allowed for adultery or physical desertion, then someone could come up to you and say, "Why are you divorcing your wife?" And you say, "Well, she committed adultery on me." Or, "Why are you divorcing your husband?" "Well, he just left me and decided not to take care of me anymore." And they could say to you, "Well, from the beginning, it was not so." My point is that if Mr. Solberg believes that Jesus allowed divorce for any reason, it was still not so from the beginning. But there were a lot of things that were not so from the beginning. When Adam and Eve were created, it was before the fall. It was before sin. Man and woman were created to literally live forever, potentially, and to stay married forever, Adam and Eve. But when sin entered, there were some things that happened to not just Adam and Eve, but to all of creation. So there were things that were not so from the beginning, but are so now because Yahweh deals with fallen humanity. Capital punishment was not so from the beginning. Man was made to live in harmony. Yahweh did not desire for anybody to murder another person. But in Genesis 9, Yahweh tells Noah after he gets off the boat, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of the Almighty made he man." And so it would be nice if nobody ever committed murder, but because murder exists in a fallen world, capital punishment is a just and righteous judgment, law, against a murderer. Sickness and debt were not so from the beginning, but they're so now. And they're not sins, they're not transgressions of the law, they are just the result of living in a fallen world. So it would be great for men and women to get married and honor their contract of marriage, but it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes one or both of the people decide that this is not for me. Now that does not make that decision right, but Yahweh in his law of Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4, allows for divorce. It is not necessarily something that he always promotes, but it is something that he permits. A thorough study of the law of divorce in Deuteronomy 24 will show that Yahweh was protecting the woman. Now, there are cases in our modern day where Yahweh's law of divorce can protect a man, but in Old Covenant Israel, men were actually allowed to have more than one wife, and so the law was not put in place to necessarily protect the man who may already have another wife when one of his wives desert or leave. It was put in place to protect a woman. Yahweh commanded a man who was hard-hearted towards a woman, he commanded him to give her a bill of divorcement. The command was 3 steps: to write out a bill of divorcement, put it in the woman's hand, and send her out of his house. And at that point, she may go and be another man's wife. Yeshua did not teach against this law of Yahweh through the mouth of Moshe in Matthew 5 or in Matthew 19. What Yeshua was combating in his teaching in the Sermon on the Mount was Jewish men who were putting away their wives without a certificate of divorce. This actually still happens today, where Jewish women try to get a get, an Aramaic word for a bill of divorce, from their Jewish husband. Some Jewish husbands refuse to give the woman a get, and thereby the woman is still legally and lawfully married to that man. In an Orthodox Jewish community, the woman can never be recognized in another marriage because she's still bound to her first husband, even though she doesn't live with him and he doesn't take care of her. This is what Yeshua was reprimanding in the first century. If you read the Darby Bible or the World English Bible, it gets this exactly right in texts like Matthew 5:32, where it says, "Whoever marries her that is put away commits adultery." Some Bibles will say whoever marries her that is divorced commits adultery, but the Greek word there is apoluo in the Greek, meaning put away or send away, a much more loose term than apostation in the Greek, meaning bill of divorcement. The same can be seen in the Hebrew Bible. Divorce would be kirithuth, and put away would be shalach. When we understand that there's a difference between put away and divorce, we see that Yeshua was not teaching against a lawful divorce from Deuteronomy 24, but that he was telling the scribes and Pharisees, if you put away your wife, you cause her to commit adultery, because whoever she gets involved with or married with after that point, she will be in adultery, seeing she's still lawfully married to her first husband. Yeshua had just said in Matthew 5:17 that we're not even supposed to think that he came to abolish the law or the prophets. He did not come to abolish. He says it twice, but rather to do something opposite, to fulfill or establish or confirm. He goes on to say that if we violate even the least of the commandments and teach others to do so, we'll be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Yeshua didn't say this in Matthew 5:17 through 19, just to turn around in 31 and 32 of that same chapter and go against what he had just said. The law of divorce is a righteous law that protects women. Sometimes men marry a woman and then later give up on that marriage. And it's not the woman's fault. A woman is protected by Deuteronomy 24:1 through 4. She's allowed to receive a divorce bill in her hand so that she can go and find a man who will justly and righteously love her, giving her food, clothing, duty of marriage, all the necessities of life, whereby she can live a fulfilling life here on the earth as a beloved wife. Yeshua did not change the law on divorce. He walked in harmony with Prophet Moshe, which in reality is walking in harmony with Almighty Yahweh. I have an extensive series of teachings on this subject on my YouTube channel. I'll post the link below this video. And I also want to encourage you to read a book by a dear friend of mine, Pastor John Carroll, Divorce and Remarriage, Theology of Healing After Heartbreak. It is a book that covers this subject better than anything else I've ever read or listened to. And I would encourage you to take time to comb through this book with an open Bible, as well as my series of teachings with an open Bible. In the next installment in this series, we're going to look at some comments made by Mr. Solberg based on Romans chapter 8, verses 3 through 4, and the weakness of the law in the flesh. We'll see you next time.